What happened? Here we go. Here it is. Hi, friends. How y'all doing? Um, that was interesting. I wanted to talk for a second about some games that this reminds me of. And some of these are a little bit reaches. I'd actually love to hear comments from the chat of other examples of this kind of mechanic and this kind of gameplay being used. But I will just like this is not an exhaustive, extensive list. This is just the stuff that comes to mind. Lost Magic was a Nintendo DS game, like pre 3DS, a DS game that was very focused on like elemental magic. And I think it was like six. It was like fire, water, wind, earth, light, and dark, maybe something like that. But you would get runes associated with each of these elements, and you could cast spells based on the runes. And because it was a DS game, like you would activate runes by drawing rune symbols on the screen with the stylus, which was neat for the most part. But you could combine runes, so you could do like 2 or 3 elements in a row, and the sequence of 2 or 3 elements that you did would cast a different spell with like a different effect. If you did like a fire and then air, it would do like a fireball or something like that. And if you did air and then fire, it would like ignite the air around you or something. I don't remember what any of the spells were, but it has similar sort of crafting component to it that was much more ad hoc. It was this idea that like it was more similar to Magica, I guess, where Magica similarly, I think you string together elemental cues, and depending on the sequence that you do, they have a different effect. Quest 64. I don't know if anybody played for the Nintendo 64. There was a game just in the US, at least, it was released as Quest 64. It was a kind of a generic RPG that did some things really differently. It had like a really weird experience system. I think it did not have spell crafting in the same way, but it also had these sort of elemental spells. And I remember a lot of decision around sort of deciding where to put experience in those elements, and like the spells would change in a very similar way. Like, you know, your fire spell would get upgraded from you can just like your staff is on fire and it does extra damage when you attack, to you can shoot fireballs, to then like you can set things on fire, to then you can do more bigger stuff. But experience was like really rare. It was hard to come by, and so you had to decide. It was a big decision, like which of those stats you would put your experience in. It was almost spellcrafting, or at least it was very, very similar to this kind of spellcrafting, where in this we have like, now we have 4, I'm suspecting that we might eventually get 5 spell slots, and we are kind of upgrading each of those spell slots. Each of them has a basic ability or a like ability set, a set of potential abilities, something like that, and we're choosing sort of how and where to upgrade them. So there's something that feels similar in that. There's a game called Jenniforge that I actually, I played a ton of Jenniforge on my college's admin computer while I had a shift monitoring the multimedia lab as an undergrad. I had just like a 5 or 6 hour stint where I just had to be present in the multimedia lab, like in the computer lab, and like help if people had questions. It was part of the IT department. I was doing this, but it was a ton of downtime, and if I didn't have like specific homework to work on, I think it was harder to bring media with you, and I don't even know that I had a smartphone at the time. So I downloaded JennaForge onto an old computer in the like at the admin station, and I played a bunch of it while I was just like sitting there. JennaForge is a game where it's a very different. It's not elemental spells. It's raffle. Yeah. Oh yeah. So before people leave, all right. Give me a second. Let me finish this intro. You guys got to stick around for the intro, and then I'll raffle. It's like a familiar system. So you would summon creatures, and you could customize the creatures that you wanted to summon. You would like give them stats, and spec them out sort of however you wanted, and those stats would like increase the casting cost, which then would decrease the total mana available. So you could like summon a couple of really strong creatures or a bunch of little creatures, and there was definitely a like spell crafting feel to that too, in a completely different direction. So that's really interesting. Okay. Anyway, that's sort of the stuff that I was thinking about a lot while I was playing this game. Especially for some reason, I think the other thing about Quest 64 is that there's a big aesthetic similarity between that game and this game. And this is much higher resolution. It's got much nicer like visual effects. But it was Quest, I think, was doing the same kind of thing. Okay. There's a conversation that I'm not totally following, but that's fine. Okay, let's do the raffle first. I am also going to see. I'm going to say congratulations on stream to Eve, who was selected for what's the name of it? The MI something for a conference to give a talk about the play-by-play community, which is really, really MIGS is the name of the conference. I'm really, really proud of her. Congratulations. I'm excited for you. I think it's going to be a great experience. I think you're going to give a great talk. And I think that I'm really also excited that this is going to be an excuse, I guess, an impetus for us to do some of the surveys of the community that we've sort of talked about doing, to try to get a better sense of who's actually watching these and who's participating, and who else is around, because I'd love to know more about all of you. All right, raffle. You guys want to raffle? Let's do that. Zombified Agrippa. is the winner of the raffle. Zombified? Are you here? Yeah, there you are. Fantastic. Congratulations. I will send you the key to Mages of Mystralia. Enjoy it. It's a really cool game. It strikes me as like just a very pleasant game experience, and so I hope that you have fun with it. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, that's it. Let's look at the questions. So, couple of questions. Eve, actually, if you don't mind, because I'm gonna go over to Skype. If you would send Zombified that key, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. All right, question: do you think the magic system would be better or worse if it was less clunky to experiment with? Why or why not? Okay, super interesting question. So let's just dissect that a little bit. Clunky to experiment with. What does that mean? The interface for spellcrafting, for basically adjusting what each of those 4 slots does, is not. It's not super. What's the word that I'm looking for? Like, difficult to grapple with. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of steps for everything. And, like the interface doesn't feel especially cluttered, but there's a lot of it, right? And so just navigating the interface there's friction there. And then there's extra friction in the sense that, like, there's a puzzle aspect to it. There are these restrictions to what runes can go where and what they do depending on where they go. And we didn't get enough runes for me to get a really, really good sense of how much their placement affects their, like, how they change the characteristics of the spell. If I have the same set of runes but I arrange them differently, does that change things, or does that make no difference? I don't have a great sense of that, but certainly depending on how I arrange them, different combinations may or may not become possible. And so there's a lot of friction, and there's an increasing amount of friction. Like, we haven't experienced a ton of it, but as you get more runes, it's clear that that possibility space gets, like, locked off. There, you start really excluding some of these possibilities. There are some of these runes that are mutually exclusive, and then there are, like, patterns of runes that block off other runes or patterns of runes. It gets really complicated. All of that makes it clunky. I mean, clunky is definitely a word. It makes it harder to interact with that system, to easily put together these combinations of things. Compare with Lost Magic or Magicka, right? Both of those systems are designed to reduce the friction as much as possible, so that it is easy for you to cast any of the hundreds of combination spells, like the recombinant hundreds of spells, so that you can, like, in a moment experiment with that and try different combinations and see what they do, and have them do all sorts of, wild and crazy different things. This game is not about that. This game, or at least, like, yeah, that system is not designed with that in mind. There's a lot of barrier to making those kinds of changes comparatively, and so you're not going to make those kinds of changes on the fly. It's a game that's much more, or it's a system that's much more about carefully designing the spell that you want. Taking that base, like, I have a bludgeoning electricity thing. How do I want to evolve that? How do I want to grow that into an attack that is going to be generally useful to me? And then with the understanding that making that useful to me, like evolving it in a certain way, is gonna prevent that ability from doing certain things. I have these 4 slots, so I have to put together a stable of spells, each of which is individually designed to be the sort of best at whatever it is that I want it to be, and which complement each other, so that at any moment I have access to whatever I need a spell to be able to do, among all of my spells. So, for example, like a thing that I might do is, a thing that I have done because I didn't have any choice, is I have one spell that is a really solid, like, fast, close range attack. My lightning staff thing, like, is real quick. It's a powerful hit for, like, close range. And then I have, like, a fireball that is a faster, like a quite fast long range that has a pretty good aim assist on it. And then I have a medium range ice path attack that is very powerful but much slower, and doesn't have quite as good an auto aim, or it does, but because it's slower, it doesn't work as effectively. But it's extremely powerful at medium range. And between those 3 spells, like, I have a spell to cover whatever I want to do. And so, as we move forward, like, maybe I get a rune that gives me the ability to turn my electricity spell into a ranged attack, and I might choose not to do that because I want to continue to have some kind of a good fast close range attack. That feels like this, actually, again, like, why this feels like Quest 64 to me. It's more about sort of deciding where and how you are going to invest in this limited stable of abilities, rather than the sort of wild experimentation that is encouraged by something like Magicka or like Lost Magic. So the question is, like, would the game be better? And I have to say, like, not necessarily, not obviously. I think that there's a ludic aesthetic to Magicka that is very much about this sort of wild experimentation, and the game leans heavily into that and says, okay, so this is a game that is about wildly experimenting with magic. The consequences of that and the core of the gameplay is these wild magical experiments that often go terribly wrong. This is not that game. This is a much more traditional, like, middle of the road action adventure game. I mean, you see how it pulls in those references to especially the Legend of Zelda games, the like Ocarina and Wind Waker era like Legend of Zelda games, and how closely it hews to these like very common, I don't want to say like tropey, but like well understood, recognizable elements and traits of fantasy games that we also saw in oh god, I guess I start keeping a list of the games that we play and just putting it right here so I can refer to it. But we've all, some of the more fantasy-based games that we've played recently, we see a lot of these same sorts of elements in the visual design, in the mechanics, in the abilities. Anyway, all of that. Where it's not about wild experimentation. It's about these using these powers as I want to say, just based on the little bit that we've played, it's more about using these powers and growing these powers towards things that are more like weapons in the Legend of Zelda series. Yeah, World to the West. Thank you, Eve. You know what I'm talking about. World to the West as a fantasy game, like a lot of the same kinds of elements, enemies, visual pieces. Like the world of Mystralia is not super well distinguished. Like there's not a lot about it that is memorable, I guess, frankly, at least so far. But there is this sense of like I'm solving a puzzle in crafting these spells, and the puzzle is an optimization puzzle, and I'm sort of like examining these weird arcane constraints on these abstract elements and figuring out a way that I can put them together that is going to create the magical effect that I'm looking for. And to me, that's very resonant with an idea of magic, and it's a different idea of magic than like magic engages with, which is magic as like a wild, untamed force. This is about magic as a craft, as like a thing that you are tuning and using, and solving, almost like, really there's a very puzzly aspect to it, and that's something that I haven't seen before. Like, I don't know another game that engages with that aspect of magic in that way, and I think that's very cool. What does the grid view of the spell mixer add over toggling runes in a simple list? I think it's that. The other thing that this reminds me of, the other game that I wanted to bring up is, and I'm gonna just like mangle this. Final Fantasy X? Final Fantasy X or 12 or 13. How many Final Fantasies are there? I don't know anything about any of them. I want to say Final Fantasy X had a skill tree system that was like on a sphere. Whatever. Yeah, sphere grid. Thank you, Tim the Mage. knows exactly what I'm talking about. Sphere Grid. If you're not familiar with the Sphere Grid system from Final Fantasy, and possibly it was Final Fantasy 13. I honestly don't know. It's like the only Final Fantasy that I played, and it was super weird. It was like a weird experience. I don't get Final Fantasy. The Sphere Grid system is bizarrely arcane. It's essentially a skill tree, but it's a skill tree that introduces a like a spatial element, and that has a couple of effects. And one of them is that, like, when you are choosing how you want to specialize your character, you have to make you're like making choices that take you further away from other possibilities, and it also means that, like, all of the characters, all of their skills, all of their possible skills exist in the same spatial continuum. So it's sort of theoretically possible to go from one character and intrude on another character's skill tree and start, like, leveling up in some other character's specialized skills. It's super, super weird. It's very confusing. I don't know that it was deployed especially effectively, but the idea behind it was, like, let's take a thing that is well understood, which well understood is the important concept. It's usually, let's take a thing that's simple, but whatever. Let's take a thing that's relatively simple, that's simple because of how well understood it is, and complexify it, and make it not like harder to use from an interface standpoint just to be obtuse about it, but let's make it harder to use in a way that gamifies it, in the sense that, like, in the sense of the way that you can think about golf as a game that is about putting a ball into a particular hole, and golf is only fun because you're not allowed to just pick up the ball and put it in the hole. You have to, like, hit it with a stick from hundreds of yards away, and try to, like, get it towards the hole in as few whacks as you can. And, like, that complexifies the very simple system of transporting a ball from one place or into a cup. But it makes it fun in doing it. It creates a game out of it. So the idea was, like, let's take a skill tree and make a game out of it. Add some constraints so that your interaction with the skill tree becomes more interesting. I think it's arguable the extent to which that worked in that game. But I think this game is trying to do something very similar. It's saying, like, rather than just a list of elements where you can choose, you know, what to put on the list or what order they go in, we're similarly spatializing it. We're saying that, like, you have to fit them onto this grid, and not only do you need to, like, place them on the grid, but they have inherent constraints around how they can be placed. So far, we're dealing with very few elements, and with very few elements, it's been interesting to see there's some very specific design around that, or at least it seems like there is. I got one, the time rune could not be placed directly onto the, like, electricity cudgel thing. There was no way to do it. There was no way that it would line up. But if I found some other rune that I could use as an intermediary, conceivably then I could like create a way to attach that to that thing. And then would that have an effect? It's unclear. I have no idea what the fuck the time rune actually does. It doesn't seem like it has any effect whatsoever. But regardless, like, that point still stands. Like, there are ways that I could even potentially, like, I could find a rune that is basically just a connector rune that doesn't do anything or does very little, but burns a space. Like, there's a way of looking at that grid that is the number of slots on that grid is the total number of potential enhancements that I can put on a spell. So, like, I could, if I could, fill that entire grid with runes, make my spell super, super powerful. But I might burn one of those slots that's a potential enhancement in order to put down, like, a connector rune that allows me to use a specific rune that I want to use that I couldn't otherwise do because of, like, how it's arranged and where its connectors are. So that's I think that's what it's going for. I think that's the point of it. And frankly, so far we haven't seen that used to a lot of effect, but it creates a possibility space that suggests gameplay in the future that I think is potentially quite interesting. Again, it plays into the sense of there's something arcane about crafting a spell. You can't just throw ingredients together. Like, it seems like that should work. And I mean, what I really kind of like about this is that it creates a system where you can imagine from the outside, it looks like I'm just throwing a bunch of ingredients together. But actually, I have to have some pretty specific knowledge about how those ingredients work, how they line up, and I have to carefully plan and think about and optimize how I am going to arrange them, or else the spell just doesn't work. And that's cool. I think that idea is super cool. I think it has a ton of potential. I think the first hour or 2 hours that we played of the game doesn't really explore that potential, but I think there's a lot of game left, and my hope would be that it does continue to explore that. Final Fantasy Tactics calculators. Yeah. Yes. So, like, some of the same kinds of stuff, like taking basic systems and adding sort of a dimension of complexity to them so that they become more of a game unto themselves. Where I think it can be a mistake is when then you keep it as just an ancillary system. So Final Fantasy 13 or whatever it was, like, the fact that your skill tree is not actually any more centered in the game, it just behaves as a standard skill tree that's just harder to use, I think that's kind of a strategic mistake. I think it's much more interesting when you take one of those simple, well-understood systems and don't just complexify it, but complexify it and also bring it forward so that it is more of the focus of the game. I think that you tend to have more success when you do that kind of thing. Should always useful moves be left out of the spell system, like shield and dash? Yeah, so again, I mean, I think, like, it's hard to say on some of this stuff how the game is gonna progress over the course of, remaining hours. Clearly, there were a lot of runes that we have not gotten yet. We got 2 out of, like, 30 or something like that. With the shield and the dash, it is set up pretty specifically so that you have to make a choice between the two. And again, like, you can switch between them, and there's not really a penalty. There's not an in-game penalty for switching between them, because you're paused when you do it, so you can do it whenever you want. But the feedback system, the interface, the game is not set up to incentivize you to do it frequently, because it's hard to do it quickly. So you're pretty much making a choice there of which of these things is the thing that's important to me, and then I'm gonna essentially carry that forward when I'm designing my other spells to compensate for whichever choice I made. If I don't know that there's a great example in the sort of limited palette of spells that we've experienced so far, but if I choose to have a dash, then being able to do sort of quick attacks is really, really important. If I choose to have a shield, then if I can find another spell that increases my maneuverability in any way, then I should sort of prioritize that kind of thing. But I think that it makes sense that, like, that's a decision that's left up to me as a player. The one thing that I'll say is it might be nice if there was a little bit more flexibility sort of within that slot system. So right now I have 4 basic elemental abilities, and I can grow those 4 abilities, but I can't, like, it might be neat. I think it would be neat. It would obviously be a different game in some ways, but I think it would be neat if I could say, like, actually, my ice ability is not as useful as either the dash or the shield. I would rather have both a dash and a shield and no ice ability whatsoever. I'd rather use that slot for a different build of the wind ability, of the wind spell, rather than and then just forego the ice entirely. The one thing that I will say is that, like, we didn't get anywhere close to this, but in the interface, there's a way for you to name your spell. So, like, right now, I have a spell that's like Actus, or Actus number 1 even, maybe. And I could rename that to be like Super Fireball. And the fact that I can name it suggests to me that maybe there is a secondary layer of interface that would allow me to switch between named spells quickly, to say that, like, I've got a Super Fireball, and then I've got a dash, and I've got a shield, and I name them appropriately, and then there's a way in the interface where, rather than manually switching out all of the runes, I can just switch between dash and shield. But I haven't actually seen that yet either, and that doesn't quite do what I want it to do, but it makes it so that it reduces the friction on making changes to the spells. Which, honestly, like, I don't know if that's a feature of the game. I don't really know if I want it to be a feature of the game. I think that as much as a player, I might want that, because anything that reduces, like, the friction of doing anything is welcome. I think actually as an experience, the game benefits, or could benefit, from disincentivizing me from doing too much ad hoc tampering with the spells. I really like the idea of a game that is about sort of carefully constructing these spells to be as good as possible. Will you be playing more of this game on or off stream? We'll see. I'm guessing probably not on stream. I think there are a bunch of games that I want to play, and a bunch of them look really interesting. But we'll see. We'll see how the next few weeks shape up and how the rest of the summer looks. I would certainly come back to this. Similarly, I don't know if I will keep playing it or how much I will keep playing it, but I would. It's just a matter of, spending that time. Like right now, I don't know that I have another game that that I would rather play over this, especially. But I've been spending a lot of my time working on card games, and I would rather do that over playing Mystralia. Like it doesn't have its hooks in me so deep that I'm that eager to keep coming back to it. I'm intrigued by the possibility of the spellcrafting system. But we'll see. Yeah, the XCOM game starring Mario characters is super bizarre, and we will see. I don't currently have a Switch, but I'm very curious about that concept. Like, that's not something that I ever thought I was gonna see. I don't know. This game, I believe, is also out or is coming out for the PlayStation. And I could see lounging on the couch and playing this game a little bit more. It seems like that kind of a game that like doesn't demand so much from you, that you could play it while being ambiently social, I don't know. It seems like maybe it's a better fit for that kind of environment, at least for me, the way that I play games, the kinds of games that I tend to play sitting on a couch rather than at my computer. So I could imagine it having more of a life for me in that context too. You can see yourself combining spells with a controller. I was playing with a controller tonight. So it's the interface is definitely controller friendly. The spell combining interface section certainly seems like it would benefit from being used with a mouse, but I don't know that it actually supports that. Yeah, and the combat, like the actual running around the world, definitely feels good with a controller. Would the game be more fun if you were evil? All right, so couple of things. Like, I'm trying to parse this. I'm trying to break this down. What does that mean? Like, how do we define the nature of evil, right? Specifically, how do we define the nature of evil within the context of this sort of generic fantasy adventure? Because there's a lot of this game that already goes there or is close to it, like could be going there. But not really. Like, it's obvious that it's not. Like, it definitely, it has a feel that pulls way back from it. But you start off, like, the beginning of this game, I'm curious, I don't know if anybody looked at the webcomic. I haven't looked at the webcomic. But from what I saw and the context that you get at the beginning, like, you start this game by blowing up your house. and then you get exiled. You are a social outcast because of the damage that you have done. The game walks back from this very, very quickly in painting you as a character as sort of scared and vulnerable and without agency in that act, that you had no intention to blow up anybody's house. You can't control yourself, although obviously, like, very quickly, once the player has control of the character is able to control themselves just fine. So there's, that creates some questions. There's also, like, and then very quickly, everybody starts to recognize that the things you are doing, or recognizes the things you are doing as altruistic, whether they are or not. And you're, like, let back into the village. And so it's clearly painting you in a way that is not evil. And at the same time, especially I think that background material clearly paints the antagonist of the story, the Marquis, as evil and oppressive and restrictive and sort of just a bad guy, a guy who does not have the country's best interests at heart. But you can see how you could easily, like, reframe a lot of this stuff. Magic is clearly dangerous. If it's been outlawed, not because of, like, a sense of jealousy, but because of its obvious danger. And you practicing magic is less of a, like, unintentional, uncontrollable side effect of your birth, and something that you're doing in defiance of a sort of social norm that is well-founded, then, and all of that is, like, close enough to the story that is being told that you could easily tell it that way. I don't know. I think that, like, you could turn this into that pretty easily. Would the game be better or more fun if that were the case? I'm tempted to say that it would. Like, if it just had a reframing. Right now, I feel like it lacks some personality. So I played a game this morning that I can't really talk a lot about the specifics of, but it's a title that's in development that I was doing some playtesting for, and it is, in some ways similarly and a fantasy action adventure, sort of broadly. But it has a lot of personality. It feels like a unique world. It's a place that is sort of unmistakable. It makes itself unmistakable, and has a charm that is very much its own. And I feel like playing this game so far, it lacks a little bit of that. It lacks a little bit of that personality that makes it feel like something really different from anything else that's out there. I think that if the game reframed its story so that you were evil, or you were more sort of consistently portrayed as evil, or anything along those lines. I think that that would help to sort of give it a sense of personality. I mean, I'm saying that with some hesitancy because the classic example of a game very like this in a lot of ways that does that, or at least allows that. I mean, there's more than one example, but the examples that exist. I think about like Fable. I think about like The Bard's Tale, and these are not games that were good. Like they didn't use that to great effect, and the way that I guess like the fact that you could be evil in those games was not enough to give them personality. So I guess that's not a guarantee. And the other way to think about it is that like right now we are being sort of particularly helpful. Like we're trying to, or at least the quests that we're doing are all focused on reclaiming this land from a corruption, helping people out, giving them what they want, ultimately overthrowing a unfair regime, presumably. The game could be more like free in its ethics for the character, free in its morality, and be more explicitly selfish and destructive. I don't know that that's especially interesting. I think that that's the way that like Fable approaches the idea of evil, and I feel like it doesn't do a lot. Like it doesn't make that setting especially interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could take that. I think that you could find an interesting direction to take it. I'm not immediately settling in on one, but finding an interesting direction to take, like your character is evil in some way, I think would probably help the game find like some footing. Evil also involves horns and scars. Like they could just slap some horns and scars on you, and then that would also probably improve the game. So yeah, no, I guess, I mean, thumbs up all around. Evil, evil, evil. Let's go evil. Alien Ashtray just subscribed. Thank you so much, Alien Ashtray. I appreciate that. I didn't think I was going to get any subscribers. That's very, very nice. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Okay, last question that I got on here. Oh no, I got two more questions. Sorry. What mage... Quinn. What made you interested in this game the most, other than the spell system? The spell system is really the thing that I feel like was highlighted in the marketing materials for this game. Like the way that this game was framed, if you go and you look at it on Steam, if you look like up the website, it really very much frames this game as like, look at how beautiful it is. It's also got this spellcrafting system, and I feel like that's like really the selling point for the game. I mean, those are the two selling points for the game. It is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's an aesthetic that I am particularly fond of, that recalls games that I really liked when I played them, when they were like when you had character designs like this that were designed out of a sort of low poly necessity for like bold colors and big flat hairstyles. I grew up with a lot of games like that. And this takes that aesthetic and like makes it real nice. Just like makes it very, very pretty. Shows you what you can do if you take away those constraints. If you sort of take the things that we found. I say we as though I deserve some credit for it, but take the things that like game designers in those days found that were beautiful, that were possible within those constraints, and then remove the constraints and expand upon that inherent beauty. I think the cinematic effects are particularly lovely. I think the character designs like I like the main character. I really liked the enchanter. I really liked the wood wretch thing boss, that guy. I like the goblins. We're seeing a lot of them, and they're like a lot very similar, which is, fine, but you get tired of them. But I think some of the like actual character models are really gorgeous, really, really very pretty, and evocative. Unfortunately, I don't get a great sense. There's nothing that backs up those character models in a big way in terms of like dialogue or story presence or mechanics. I'm one of the things that's most intriguing to me, that I'm most curious about. I mean, of course, like true to form, I guess, is the gardening mechanic that was suggested. Not because I think it's going to be a particularly interesting gardening mechanic, but because I think it is going to maybe flesh out the character of the enchanter a little bit. Like, I might get to have some non-questy sorts of interactions with that lizard person character, and why does he have a garden? Like, what's the deal with that? Like, that seems potentially interesting. So I think there's potential for the characters beyond just how they look, but I really, really like also how they look, and that's a selling point, I think, of this game. Okay, last question. Are you a dragon? Eve is asking this question, I assume, on Jetlag's behalf. So I'm going to ask both of you rhetorically. You mean in the game, right? Like, is the character a dragon as opposed to am I a dragon? Because that's another question that I haven't really considered. I'm going to have to probably go with no. But within the context of the game, I mean, that's interesting. It's interesting to think about it that way. So, are you a scaling flying lizard monster? No, pretty definitively no. Are you an element that breaks the rules that are set out, that are understood for the game? kind of, but only nominally. You are established as a character, as somebody who is both somebody who is like not supposed to exist as part of normal society, because normal society is so heavily anti-mage, and also somebody who's not supposed to exist within the mage society, because like you've stumbled on this, I'm assuming, ancient mysterious power that nobody seems to quite know what to do with, and it's accelerated your progress as a mage. So in both of those senses, you are kind of like this exceptional person. You are an exception to specific rules. But you are also, like, both of those things are framed as background story. Like, it's just told to you that you are this exception to rules within the context of the game. The only rules that are established are your rules. And so, like, I think it's a hard sell to say that you are a dragon in that sense. Is there something specifically dragon-like about this character in the context of the genre at large? That's potentially interesting. I think that, like, the thing that differentiates this character from parallel characters in other games within this, large, well-explored genre is the spellcrafting, is your ability to sort of put together these specific spells that do specific things. And again, frankly, so far, the bit of the game that we've seen, you don't do anything dramatic or interesting enough to warrant that sort of like sense that this character is breaking any genre-specific rules. Everything that we have done, all of the powers that we've had, that we've used, have all been sort of well within really the, like, Legend of Zelda series, let alone the larger corpus of fantasy action adventure games. But the game hints, Mystralia hints at the potential for a much bigger assortment of power potential, of these characteristics that you can add to powers, and that's very cool. And that is actually potentially like breaking rules that are well established and well understood within the genre conventions of this type of game. And then, like, I really hope that that's where this game goes, because in some ways it justifies the lack of personality that I feel in a lot of the rest of the game, and the way that the world feels and the characters feel. They feel generic because they are inhabiting this generic genre space. And as you progress through the game, as you become more powerful, and as you gain access to these, like, wildly different combinations of abilities, you break out of that frame that they have established of a conventional fantasy action adventure game, and start to do things that are previously unheard of. I think there's a very strong possibility, and certainly potential, that this game could go in that direction, could take it that far. The other thing that I've been doing a lot of recently is watching David Lynch media, TV and movies, and I can imagine this game building from something that is very conventional and recognizable, and very deliberately, as it moves on, identifying and breaking down those conventions and doing things that are, wildly unexpected. That I sort of don't expect from this game, just because the size of the team and the scope and scale of the game probably don't allow for a lot of the kinds of things that, from a technical perspective, you would need to be able to do to like create unexpected effects on that scale. But I think that even just with the combination of elements, crafting specific spells, depending on what those elements are, depending on what the glyphs that you can find are and how they interact with one another, I do think that there's the potential for it to be to defy the conventions of the genre. Okay, cool. That's it. It's 10:17. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna get some sleep. Tomorrow's Friday. Good God. I believe that we will be having an after class tomorrow. We're talking about trying to do a tabletop day, so we might try to play a board game or two. Jesse has a copy of the new Star Wars dice and card game, I think, Destiny, and I'm super excited to play that. So tune in tomorrow after class, maybe board games. There will be more information on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter to keep up to date. Next week, we'll do play-by-play, some more play-by-play. In 2 weeks, just a warning, I'm going to be out of town, so there will not be either of those shows that week. Also, keep in mind, Day 9 is still on vacation, so no Mostly Walking on Monday of next week. It is also the 4th of July weekend for us in the United States. So, yeah. But then we'll be coming back the second half of next week, and we'll be here for play-by-play next week. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate it. Love chatting with you. Love trying out these new games and seeing what they do and where they go. And being able to do that. Thank you again to Borealis Games and to Dan Edelman. Thank you very much for stopping by and hanging out with us and chatting with us. Mages of Mystralia is available on Steam, 10% off during the Steam summer sale. It's neat. I like, it's got a nice smooth play, and it's gorgeous, and I think it's got a lot of potential. I'm really curious to see where it goes. So if you were interested, pick that up. And yeah, I think that's it. Have a great week. I'll see some of you tomorrow for after class, and if I don't see you tomorrow, have a great weekend. Thanks again. Bye.